Hello, I'm Sally, and this is the story of how my own sister locked me out in the dead of night, calling me useless. Left freezing outside, with nothing but betrayal in my heart. But when the guard said, "She's the owner," I realized my life was a lie. The inheritance, the house, everything was slipping away, and I didn't see it coming. This isn't just about a house, it's about everything that's been stolen from me. What will I do now? The streets were quiet, save for the whispering wind that cut through my coat as I trudged toward home. After a 12-hour shift at the nursing facility, my body ached and my mind was foggy, but I had imagined the comfort of my own bed, the warmth of the old quilt my mother used to fold neatly every night. Yet something felt off as I turned onto my street, the familiar hum of porch lights absent, windows dark, a neighborhood usually alive with chatter and the occasional barking dog reduced to a ghostly calm. My hands trembled slightly as I reached for the key, the cold biting through my gloves. The key, familiar and trusted, refused to turn. I tried again. Nothing. My heart quickened, a low thrum echoing through my chest as I knocked, louder this time, pounding with a desperation I hadn't known I possessed. Silence met me, thick and deliberate, like a wall erected against me. Memories clawed their way to the surface. Thanksgivings passed, when I was always the one fetching plates, washing dishes, setting the table, while Fiona sat proudly at the head of the table, taking credit for everything. I remembered the sting when she called me invisible glue, her words coded in a cruel amusement, leaving me small and unseen, even as I held together the household around her. As adults, she inherited the mantle of executor when her mother passed, a title I had once imagined was shared. I had returned home to help, thinking my presence would matter, believing loyalty and dedication had weight. But over the years, the subtle humiliations mounted, excursions I wasn't invited to, decisions made without my input, laughter shared behind closed doors where my name never came up. I had learned to bend, to comply, to hope that if I worked hard enough, I would matter. Tonight, that hope shattered. I stomped through the fallen leaves toward the gated entrance, my breaths puffing out in small clouds that dissipated quickly. Carl, the night guard, looked up from his small station, recognizing me immediately, but his face bore a polite hesitation I didn't understand. "I was told you don't live here anymore," he said quietly. I demanded to know who had made the decision, why I was being treated as a trespasser in my own home. He hesitated, then muttered, "Fiona, she said she's the owner." My stomach sank, the ground beneath my feet feeling suddenly colder, harder. Not just locked out, but erased. My eyes burned as I processed the implication. Carl couldn't let me in. He tried to offer comfort with a feeble, "She left instructions, ma'am, you're not on the list anymore." The words felt like nails, hammering away at the trust I had once placed in my family. I sank to the curb, cold seeping into my bones, stunned into silence, my fingers numb despite the motion of wrapping them tightly against my chest. I sat there, shivering, replaying every sacrifice I had made, the apartment I gave up, the convenience of a job I could have taken elsewhere, my patience stretched thin across years of unseen labor. How had I not noticed the gradual encroachment, the meticulous planning that Fiona had woven into every document, every minor alteration, every offhand remark? 2 weeks ago, she had casually asked about changing mailbox names, a question that seemed mundane, trivial even. Now I understood the significance, the quiet but deliberate erasure that had been building all along. It wasn't impulsive cruelty, it was strategy. And I had walked right into it, blind and trusting. A chime from my phone snapped me back. A single message, stark and unapologetic, from Fiona: "It's time you learn your place. Don't make this harder." I held the phone close, reading and rereading, the words gnawing at some fragile hope I had not realized I clung to. "I already did," I whispered under my breath, but the rest of the thought never left my lips. I stood slowly, the wind biting harder as if in punishment, and began to walk toward the city, each step deliberate, directionless yet determined. The streets stretched before me, empty and quiet, yet my mind raced, mapping possibilities, weighing the unfairness, planning each small rebellion that would come with the morning light. I did not cry. Not because it didn't hurt, but because crying would have been an admission, a concession I wasn't ready to make. Morning light crept over the quiet streets, casting long shadows that stretched like thin fingers across the pavement. I sat in a small corner of the cafe, the steam from my coffee curling upward, a thin veil between me and the house I once called home. From this distance, the details leapt out in a way they hadn't the night before: the freshly printed mailbox label, the precise angles of the security cameras, cars that appeared at odd intervals, almost as if someone were choreographing their movements. My mind raced, cataloging every minor shift I had ignored. Have I been blind all this time? I muttered under my breath, jotting notes into my journal, connecting the dots of a pattern I had failed to see, humiliation sharpening my clarity rather than drowning me in despair. Each entry was deliberate, meticulous, a ledger of betrayal and proof that I would need. I breathed in deeply, trying to temper the simmering anger, turning it into focus, a quiet determination that burned just beneath the surface. Memories of Fiona's subtle manipulations over the years rose unbidden. How she redirected a delivery once meant for me, claiming a clerical mistake, and how that small act now seemed like a piece of a larger strategy. Comments about my supposed incompetence, withheld information, casual exclusion from family decisions, all accumulated into a mental map of her control, a lattice of influence I had once mistaken for coincidence or oversight. My parents' favoritism had given her the upper hand, and I had allowed it, enduring her quiet tyranny. Now, seeing the patterns clearly, I understood my own resilience. I whispered to myself, I've endured, but I'm learning fast. Each recollection fed my resolve, transforming years of unnoticed patience into a calculated awareness. I rose from my chair and began moving through the neighborhood with careful observation. I inquired at local offices about recent property changes, noting every permit, every ownership document, the bureaucratic footprints Fiona had left behind. Neighbors passed, sometimes glancing knowingly, whispering in low tones, as if acknowledging the tension that now seemed palpable. I documented it all: photographs of mailboxes, security camera placements, subtle adjustments to entryways. Even as Fiona emerged from the house, I noted the flare of anger that rose and forced myself to temper it, channeling it into strategic calculation. Patience became a weapon, evidence became a shield, and slowly a plan began to crystallize in my mind. Observation, documentation, and timing, these were now my tools. Later, I met Laura at a coffee shop near the community. She understood the dynamics better than anyone, having worked closely with both of us and observed Fiona's subtle manipulations firsthand. "You've been underestimated for too long," she said, her tone firm but encouraging. "Now they're overconfident." We spoke quietly about security logs, property rights, and procedural angles that might be exploited to assert my place. Her insight provided validation, confirming that my instincts and intelligence were not just legitimate, they were necessary. I left our meeting with renewed determination, seeing paths I had not previously considered, knowing I was no longer a passive observer but a participant armed with knowledge. Returning to the house later in the day, I noticed a small envelope tucked against the doorframe, addressed to me. Inside was confirmation that Fiona had formally changed ownership of the shared property, effective immediately. The reality hit harder than anticipated. The stakes were now concrete, undeniable. I felt the weight of every choice I had made, every year of unacknowledged effort, every moment of quiet endurance. It was no longer a test of patience. This was a battle I had to approach with intelligence, strategy, and unwavering resolve. I tucked the letter carefully into my bag, inhaled the crisp fall air, and resolved that the next move would be mine, deliberate and measured. The challenge ahead was clear, and for the first time in years, I felt the thrill of having the upper hand, even if just in preparation. The day was crisp, the air sharp as I slid into my car, my notes from yesterday resting on the passenger seat. I drove slowly past the property, eyes tracing every detail I had observed before: the angles of the driveway, the subtle rearrangement of potted plants, the comings and goings of cars that seemed almost rehearsed. Each movement spoke volumes, signaling the deliberate orchestration of appearances in the neighborhood. Frustration gnawed at me, but it was tempered by an analytical clarity. I catalogued everything on my phone, jotting quick notes between glances at the house, already considering legal implications and who might be allies in this quietly escalating conflict. My mind was a grid, each observation a node, each pattern another clue in Fiona's covert design. I clenched my jaw, aware that anger alone would not serve me, strategy would. By mid-morning, I found myself at the local library, poring over property and legal records, each page a revelation. Discrepancies emerged in ownership documents, overlooked filings that now suggested deliberate manipulation. The timing of Fiona's recent actions clicked into place, everything she claimed as hers, every decision she had framed as benign or routine, had been carefully engineered. My anger simmered under the surface, yet I forced it into control, replacing emotion with meticulous strategy. I listed every possible scenario for confrontation, every angle for potential legal action, constructing a plan in which patience and precision would outweigh impulse. The frustration of years of subtle manipulation was now a tool I wielded with deliberate intent. Stepping out of the library, I almost collided with Marcus, a former neighbor who had known Fiona well. His eyes held a knowing look as he hesitated before speaking. "You've noticed it too, huh?" he said quietly, nodding toward the house in the distance. He recounted Fiona's influence over community decisions, her subtle marginalization of me in events and gatherings, her quiet leverage over neighbors who often deferred to her authority. Each story, each passing remark, validated my suspicions. Irritation flared alongside disbelief, yet beneath it lay a growing confidence. The pieces were falling into place, and I realized that my strategy needed to encompass not only documents but also social dynamics, the currents of opinion and influence Fiona had long manipulated to her favor. Returning home, the tension only thickened. From the driveway, I noticed a courier slip a sealed envelope toward the house, addressed to Fiona. It was a minor gesture, yet it signaled her awareness of surveillance, a subtle assertion of control that raised the stakes. I paused, considering immediate confrontation against the necessity of more evidence. Every moment carried potential advantage or risk. If I acted too soon, I might alert her further, but waiting could solidify her position. Anxiety simmered beneath my calm exterior as I balanced calculation with caution, each breath a reminder that patience now was more powerful than reaction. The day's observations culminated in an almost surreal moment later that afternoon. As I approached the house once more, the study door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of paper peeking through. A legal form altering property rights glinted in the sun, confirming what I had begun to suspect. Fiona had already set the wheels in motion, and the stakes were irrevocably higher than I had imagined. My heart tightened, but not with despair. This was clarity. Knowledge had shifted the power balance, and with careful action, I could reclaim agency. I stepped back, taking in the scene, already weighing my next move, my mind alive with strategy. It was no longer a matter of endurance, it was time to act wisely, with every move deliberate, every step calculated. Fiona's hidden threats had been revealed, and the game was now fully visible. Late afternoon sunlight filtered through the half-closed blinds as I sat at my kitchen table, sifting through the stack of papers I had gathered. Each document told a fragment of a larger story, revealing inconsistencies between what Fiona had claimed and what was officially recorded. I traced connections in my mind, forming a mental map of her network, seeing clearly how she had influenced neighbors, manipulated events, and subtly rewired our family dynamics. Anxiety and determination battled within me, but I forced my focus outward, thinking like a strategist rather than a victim. I reviewed past encounters, remembering small humiliations and moments that had once seemed inconsequential. Now, patterns emerged, subtle sabotage disguised as everyday oversight, minor incidents that collectively painted a portrait of deliberate control. I noted potential allies, people who could verify my observations and strengthen my position when the time came. Stepping outside, I wandered the neighborhood streets, keeping Fiona in view without being obvious. She moved among neighbors with practiced ease, offering a smile here, a gentle nod there, while quietly undermining my reputation. A neighbor stopped briefly, inadvertently confirming the pattern of Fiona's manipulations. It was in the way she framed stories, whispered about minor events, and controlled perception with a light touch that left no immediate trace. I watched, realizing that her power extended beyond the house. It was about shaping how the world saw me. Frustration flared, but beneath it, a growing confidence took root. Each observation sharpened my thinking, each revelation strengthened my resolve. I started seeing the edges of a plan, a strategy of patience, precision, and subtle counteraction, all unfolding in real time. Returning home, my attention turned to the daily intrusions that had once seemed trivial: delayed mail, misdirected deliveries, messages intercepted or manipulated. Each incident was a thread in Fiona's larger tapestry of sabotage, designed to erode my credibility and autonomy quietly. I catalogued them in my mind, assessing the risks of immediate confrontation versus further documentation. Cautious anger simmered, tempered by vigilance, and I considered the legal and social consequences, forming contingencies for multiple outcomes. I could feel the stakes climbing. Fiona's moves were deliberate, and each required measured response. The balance between observation and action weighed heavily, but clarity came from methodical assessment rather than reactive impulse. I spent the next hour at my computer, cross-referencing property records, social registrations, and local news reports, seeking minor irregularities that hinted at financial manipulation. Assembling the evidence, I constructed a cohesive narrative of wrongdoing, a map of influence and control that extended beyond what I had imagined. Legal channels, community allies, and strategic exposure became part of a framework I was building with careful attention to timing and effect. Determination sharpened my focus. Each fact, each pattern, was a piece of leverage. The day's light dimmed as I packed up my notes, ready to return home, aware that the line between observation and action was narrowing. Back at the house, an envelope left carelessly by a courier caught my eye. Addressed to Fiona, it had been overlooked in her busy hands, the seal slightly ajar. I glimpsed documents referencing changes in property and ownership, confirming the sabotage I had begun to suspect. My heart tightened, not with fear but with clarity. Fiona had acted, assuming her moves were invisible. But I saw everything now. Each calculated gesture, every manipulation, no longer hidden from me. The web she had spun was intricate, but awareness brought power. I tucked the envelope aside, already plotting my next steps, knowing patience and precision would turn her own strategy against her. This was no longer merely observation, it was preparation for calculated action. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter like a silent verdict, its contents heavier than I had anticipated. I stared at it for a long moment, letting the weight of Fiona's calculated moves sink in. Shock lingered, but it quickly morphed into a sharper clarity. Analysis, not despair, would guide my next steps. I outlined scenarios in my head: what to say, how to keep my composure, how to protect myself legally and socially if things went sideways. Each possibility was a mental rehearsal, a blueprint of caution and precision. The tension tightened, but beneath it, a subtle empowerment took hold. I wasn't just a bystander anymore. Every misstep she had counted on me making now fueled a controlled determination to act with intent rather than reaction. I gathered the documents, tucked them safely in my bag, and set out with a clear mind, each step forward deliberate. Meeting Fiona at the local cafe was an exercise in restraint. From a distance, she looked composed, the familiar poise masking the calculated mind I had come to know. As I approached, her smile was polite but measured, the casual conversation peppered with small, cutting remarks disguised as jokes. I noticed immediately the inconsistencies in her story. The half-truths that once seemed insignificant now glared like neon signs. I kept my responses neutral, measuring tone, expression, and timing. Each word she uttered was another data point, and I catalogued them carefully, identifying the subtle attempts to manipulate the narrative. Frustration bubbled under the surface, yet alongside it grew a cautious confidence. This confrontation was a game, and I was determined not to play on her terms alone. Midway through the meeting, Laura, my ally from earlier investigations, slipped into the cafe unnoticed. She handed me a small folder across the table, eyes flicking briefly to Fiona before returning to mine. Inside were notes and copies of minor manipulations, interventions Fiona had orchestrated in the neighborhood, overlooked filings, and community whispers that corroborated my suspicions. A sense of vindication swept through me, the puzzle pieces fit together more clearly than ever. Gratitude mingled with renewed determination, each revelation empowering me to plan with foresight. I could see the outlines of a strategy, a path to reveal the depth of her deception without overexposing myself too soon. The stakes had climbed, but so had my resolve. As the evening wore on, I stepped outside, letting the cool Missouri air settle my mind. I reflected on the potential consequences of any public confrontation, reputations, family dynamics, legal entanglements. Each possibility demanded measured thought, each action a careful balance between ethics and pragmatism. I reviewed options silently, mapping out silent but strategic countermeasures, considering who needed to know what, and when. The inner debate was tense, but clarity emerged from careful deliberation. Patience would be my shield, intelligence my weapon. I walked slowly, each footstep grounded in awareness of the broader game I had entered. The feeling of empowerment solidified. I was no longer reacting, I was orchestrating. Turning the corner from the cafe, a familiar figure appeared unexpectedly. My heart skipped as recognition hit, a minor antagonist aligned with Fiona, or perhaps a new observer in her web. They had seen me, undoubtedly tracing my movements, analyzing my patterns as I had theirs. A flicker of tension ran through me, sharp and immediate, but it was tempered by calm calculation. I observed the reaction, noting subtleties in body language and gaze. Every detail mattered. This unplanned encounter underscored the reality: my actions were under scrutiny, but that knowledge only strengthened my resolve. I would move forward cautiously but decisively, aware that the shadows I confronted were watching as closely as I had been. The battle was no longer abstract, it was immediate, and I was ready. The night was heavy with anticipation as I sat down at my desk, reviewing everything I had gathered so far. The pile of documents, texts, and photos lay before me, each piece of evidence a thread in the web of deception Fiona had been weaving. My mind worked quickly, sorting through the pieces, mentally drafting a step-by-step plan. I couldn't afford to act impulsively, every move had to be calculated. I rehearsed the words I would say, the responses I might need, the inevitable attacks or provocations that would come. Anxiety buzzed just beneath the surface, but I pushed it aside. No more second-guessing, no more being passive. The game had changed, and I was ready to take control. The tension was palpable as I left my house and made my way to the local community meeting. I was determined to expose Fiona's manipulation, but this confrontation had to be precise, nothing too obvious, nothing too brash. As I walked into the small cafe where the meeting was held, I saw Fiona standing by the counter, speaking with a few neighbors. Her voice was loud and confident, as always, her smile sharp, calculated. I took a seat at a nearby table, watching her carefully, waiting for the right moment. When Fiona finally approached, our exchange started off predictably, small talk, empty pleasantries. But the tension was already there, hanging between us. I could feel it building, like an unspoken challenge. It wasn't long before she threw a jab, disguised as a comment about my diminishing involvement in the community. It was her typical passive-aggressive way of undermining me, but this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. I stayed calm, letting her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "Funny, I've been keeping a close eye on things. Seems like you've been more involved than I remembered." She smiled, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. A crack in the facade. As I continued to listen, I noticed more inconsistencies in her story, small details that didn't add up, phrases that contradicted what I knew to be true. It was almost too easy. Fiona's confidence seemed to be growing, but it was a hollow confidence, one that would crumble once I made my move. My suspicions were right, she was lying, and I was going to make sure everyone knew it. When the meeting wrapped up, I made my move. I quietly exposed a minor falsehood Fiona had told about a community project she had supposedly led. A simple correction, but one that would undermine her credibility. No one noticed the subtle shift, but Fiona's posture stiffened, and I could see her mind working as she tried to cover up her slip. She was rattled, and I savored the moment. It was only a small victory, but it felt good to have her on the defensive for once. As I left the cafe, the satisfaction of my small victory was quickly replaced by a familiar, gnawing anxiety. Fiona was smart, and I knew she wouldn't take this lying down. I had just begun to expose the cracks in her facade, and she would retaliate. That was inevitable. And sure enough, the very next day, I began to notice the first signs of her response. Rumors started circulating among the neighbors. Subtle whispers, behind the back conversations. Nothing overt, nothing I could prove, but the effect was clear. Fiona had started her own counterattack, leveraging her connections and manipulating the people around me. I had expected it, but the reality of it still stung. It was clear that the stakes were higher than I had imagined. The tension in the neighborhood rose, and minor social conflicts began to escalate. Neighbors I had known for years suddenly seemed distant, their behavior colder, more calculated. Fiona was working her magic again, weaving a web of manipulation, and I was just another pawn in her game. But this time, I wasn't going to play by her rules. I wasn't going to sit back and let her continue this charade. As the days passed, Fiona's moves became more brazen. She planted misleading information, trying to discredit me further. At first, I wasn't sure how to respond. My instincts screamed to confront her, to end this madness once and for all. But I knew better. I had to stay patient. I couldn't let her push me into making a rash move. Instead, I reflected on everything that had happened so far. I analyzed her behavior, the way she had manipulated those around her, the patterns she had set in motion. She thought she had control, but I could see the flaws, the cracks in her carefully constructed web. I wasn't just playing defense anymore. I was making my move. But the moment I began to formulate my strategy, a new development caught my attention. As I walked home from a late-night meeting, I noticed a familiar figure lingering near my house, someone I recognized as one of Fiona's close allies. I froze. They had been watching me, waiting for something. And now, they knew I had started to notice. The danger was real, but so was the opportunity. Fiona might have thought she was pulling the strings, but now, it was my turn to act. I turned to face the ally, my mind racing. Should I confront them now, or wait? I didn't have the luxury of time anymore, and my every move was being tracked. But that wouldn't stop me. It would only make my next move more deliberate, more calculated. The house was quiet, too quiet. I sat in front of my desk, the soft hum of the evening settling around me. The weight of everything I had uncovered pressed on me, but instead of feeling overwhelmed, I felt something else, clarity. The dots had connected. Fiona's manipulations weren't just about her petty power plays, they were part of something much bigger. She wasn't just trying to control me, she was trying to control the narrative, my reputation, my family. I replayed everything in my mind, the whispers, the subtle jabs, the way she'd always tried to make me feel invisible. Every action now made sense. She had always been so careful, so methodical in her approach, but there were cracks in her armor. And those cracks, I could exploit. The frustration I had felt for so long was turning into something else. A quiet, simmering anger that didn't blind me. No, this was different. It was focused. Strategic. For the first time, I felt like I had a real chance to take control. Fiona had underestimated me for far too long. I made a mental note of everything I needed to do, step by step. I wasn't going to rush this. Fiona had been playing the long game, but now, the tables were turning. I thought about the next moves I needed to make to not only expose her but to take back what was rightfully mine. I started drafting my final plan. It had to be precise, no mistakes, no rash decisions. Fiona had caused enough damage already, but now it was my turn. I wasn't going to let her get away with what she'd done. I would use everything I had learned about her. Every lie. Every manipulation. The pieces were all there. I just had to put them together in a way that would finally expose her. Then, as I gathered my thoughts, I realized there was more. Something I hadn't expected, something big. Fiona had made a mistake. A glaring one. She had left a trail, a small but significant error in the way she'd handled some documents. Something that, if used correctly, could completely destroy her. It was the perfect leverage, and I had it in my hands. I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. She had been so careful, but she wasn't perfect. She had let her guard down. And now, I could use her weakness against her. I couldn't do this alone, though. I needed someone who understood what I was facing, someone who could help me navigate the legal and emotional complexities of this battle. Someone who wouldn't let me make reckless moves. I reached out to Laura, a trusted friend who had always understood the dynamics in my family. I explained the situation to her, carefully laying out my plan. She listened, her voice steady and reassuring. "You've been playing it right, Sally. But you need to stay sharp. Fiona won't back down easily. She'll try to twist everything you throw at her." Her words resonated with me. This wasn't just about confronting Fiona. It was about playing this game with the precision of a chess master. Every move had to be calculated. Every step measured. Laura's validation was what I needed. It gave me the confidence to move forward, but it also reminded me of the stakes. As the evening went on, the plan began to take shape in my mind. Fiona had started a war, and now, I was going to finish it. I knew my first move would be small, subtle, but it would set the stage for everything that followed. It would be a reminder to Fiona that I wasn't someone she could walk over anymore. She would feel my presence, whether she liked it or not. The night settled in, and I felt the tension building. It was time to act, but not recklessly. No. I had to take my time, wait for the right moment. I was in control now. I made my first move the following day. I casually corrected a small falsehood Fiona had spread during a neighborhood gathering. Nothing huge, nothing that would cause an immediate uproar, but enough to plant a seed of doubt. The kind of seed that would make her second-guess every word she spoke. The satisfaction was brief, but it was enough to keep me going. I knew Fiona would respond soon. She always did. She would retaliate, and when she did, I would be ready. That night, as I sat at my desk, reflecting on everything that had happened, I saw a car pull into the driveway. It was Fiona's. She had been watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. But I knew better. She was the one who had made the mistake this time. I couldn't help but smile. The game was on, and this time, I wasn't the one playing catch-up. The evening felt charged, like static before a storm. I stood at the mirror, adjusting my dress, feeling the weight of the coming confrontation settle on my shoulders. The evidence was in my hands. The strategy had been crafted, rehearsed, and now it was time to act. Fiona had pushed me too far, but I wasn't the same person I had been just a few months ago. The tension in my chest only fueled my confidence. Tonight, I would take control, not just of the room, but of everything she had tried to steal from me. The banquet hall was filled with the murmur of family and friends, laughter mixed with the clinking of glasses. As I walked in, the room seemed to pause for a second. I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the heart of the gathering, Fiona standing not far from me, her eyes scanning the room, unaware of what was coming. I felt the coldness in my fingertips as I pulled out the documents, the carefully curated evidence I had compiled over the past few weeks. It wasn't just about Fiona anymore. It was about my dignity. It was about reclaiming everything she had tried to bury. The subtle manipulation, the lies, and the way she had twisted everything for her own gain, no more. Tonight, I would expose her. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, but carrying a sharp edge that cut through the noise, "there's something that needs to be said. It's time you all knew the truth." A hush fell over the room. Fiona turned toward me, her smile faltering, her eyes narrowing. She knew, in that instant, what was coming. The air was thick with anticipation. I laid the documents out on the table in front of me, proof of the manipulation, the lies, the schemes. As I revealed them one by one, I could see the shock on the faces of the people around me. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room, but I didn't let myself waver. Fiona's face drained of color as she tried to maintain her composure, but it was too late. The damage had been done. The twist came quickly. Fiona had always been the one who controlled the narrative, the one who made sure I was the outsider. But now, as I pointed to the most damning piece of evidence, her signature on a falsified document, it was clear. Her web of lies was unraveling. Fiona's voice came out in a tight, controlled tone, but I could see the cracks forming. "This is ridiculous. You're making a scene for nothing. You don't even know what you're talking about." I let her speak, letting her try to manipulate the situation as she always did. But this time, it was different. This time, I had the upper hand. Before she could continue, my cousin Rachel stepped forward. Her voice was soft but firm. "Sally's right. I saw the document myself. This isn't just a misunderstanding." Fiona's eyes darted around the room, looking for an ally, but there were none. One by one, the people who had once been her supporters turned their gaze away from her. The tables had turned. The room buzzed with a mix of disbelief and whispers. Fiona stood frozen, her mask slipping, revealing a crack in her carefully crafted persona. I could feel a sense of empowerment building within me. Every lie she had told, every manipulation she had used, was being exposed in front of our family. She was no longer in control. Fiona tried to regain her footing. "You think this will change anything? I've always been in charge here. You're just jealous of what I've built." Her words were sharp, but they didn't carry the same weight they once did. I could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear that she was losing her grip. "But I wasn't finished yet." "You've never built anything," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "You've torn everything down. You've manipulated every person here. And I've had enough." The silence that followed was deafening. Fiona opened her mouth, but no words came out. It was as if the truth had shattered her ability to speak. Before she could react, my brother, Chris, spoke up. "I didn't know, Sally. I had no idea." His words hit harder than any accusation. Fiona had always manipulated him, but now, for the first time, he saw the truth. His betrayal was real, and it stung. But it was also a moment of release. I had expected this confrontation to break me, but instead, it had empowered me. Fiona attempted a final defense, but I saw the cracks deepening. She was losing control, and with it, any semblance of the power she once had. The tension between us was palpable. But just as I thought the confrontation was coming to an end, Fiona did something I hadn't expected. Her lips parted, and she spoke in a voice that was both cold and threatening. "You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of. There's still a lot you don't know." The words hung in the air like a warning, a promise that this fight wasn't over. I felt a shiver run down my spine, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was resolve. Fiona had made one last desperate attempt to regain control, but I wasn't backing down. I had already won. The final move was mine to make. The weight of the past few weeks hung over me like a storm cloud. But now, as the evening sun dipped below the horizon, it felt like something had shifted. The battle had been fought, and the pieces had fallen into place. Fiona's lies were exposed, and the truth was now out in the open. Yet, despite the chaos of the confrontation, I felt a strange sense of peace settle within me. The family was quiet, still processing the revelations. There had been gasps, accusations, and plenty of silent stares. I could hear murmurs of disbelief, of regret, and the faintest hints of guilt. As I observed them, I found myself feeling an odd mix of satisfaction and relief. The tension that had gripped me for so long was finally beginning to dissolve. It was over. But the road to this moment hadn't been easy, and I knew that some wounds were still fresh. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how to move forward. The truth had come out, but the healing was just beginning. I took a deep breath and sat back. There was a brief, almost imperceptible moment where I felt completely free, unburdened. It wasn't just the confrontation that had brought this sense of closure, but the realization that I had done what I needed to do. I had stood my ground and reclaimed my life. As the night stretched on, family members began to approach me, each one trying to make sense of what had happened. Some expressed their disbelief at Fiona's actions. Others, like my brother, Chris, stepped forward with a hesitant apology, one that seemed as much for himself as it was for me. His words were genuine, though laced with the guilt of having been blind for so long. "I didn't see it," Chris admitted quietly. "I didn't want to see it. But now, I understand." I nodded, not sure what to say. I didn't need an apology from him, I needed his understanding. And in that moment, I saw a glimpse of it. It wasn't much, but it was something. As the evening wore on, conversations started to shift. Apologies were exchanged, and many of the family members seemed to be confronting their own mistakes. The weight of the lies, the years of manipulation, began to feel lighter. Slowly, the bitterness that had been allowed to fester started to fade. Then came the unexpected, Fiona's silence. She had retreated, standing off to the side, watching from a distance. It wasn't the defensive rage I had anticipated. Instead, it was almost as if she were processing her own downfall. There was no justification, no attempt to counter what had been laid bare. She simply stood there, stewing in the consequences of her actions. The entire ordeal felt surreal. It had taken years of simmering frustration and quiet suffering, but in this moment, the power had shifted. I no longer felt like a victim. Instead, I felt empowered. I had outlasted Fiona's schemes, and now, I was free to move on. As I sat in the quiet garden later that evening, the moonlight casting long shadows on the ground, I thought about how far I had come. The struggle had changed me, and I realized just how much strength I had gained along the way. The old version of me, the one who had been passive, uncertain, was gone. I was someone new, someone who knew her worth. I had learned the hard way that justice wasn't always immediate, and it wasn't always loud. But it was real. And it came when you least expected it, not in grand gestures, but in quiet moments of clarity and resilience. Fiona had wanted to control the narrative, to keep me in the shadows. But here I was, standing in the light, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly seen. The family was still adjusting, and I knew it would take time for everything to heal. Some bonds couldn't be fixed overnight. But I wasn't in a hurry anymore. I had the space to move at my own pace, to rebuild what I could, and to leave behind what no longer served me. As I turned to leave the garden, I caught sight of a small trinket on the table, a delicate silver necklace I had worn years ago, before everything had gone wrong. It had always been a symbol of my past, of my hope and dreams that had seemed so distant then. But now, holding it in my hand, I felt a sense of closure. The past no longer had control over me. I had freed myself, piece by piece, and the journey had made me stronger. I looked at the moon one last time, a final, silent goodbye to the darkness that had followed me for so long. Now, it was time to step into the future. With strength. With purpose. Have you ever faced something like this? I asked quietly, turning to the audience, my words not just a reflection but an invitation. Remember, strength often comes quietly, and it's in the moments when you least expect it that you'll find your power.